All right, guys, welcome back to Expanding the Conversation with Richard and Kofi. Today, we wanted to talk a little bit about parenting. You know, there was a time when Richard and I did not have children, and now we do. And I feel like a lot of people who are, around our age group, have coming out of school, and now have their own families and they're raising children. And so we're just going to talk a little bit about this. We talk about our children all the time, sort of the pride and joy of our lives. I have two. Richard has two himself, one boy, one girl on both sides here. And we have a little bit of fun with it because I think kids are they're a blessing in many ways. But boy, raising children isn't always fun.
Yeah, yeah.
It isn't always fun. It's certainly a challenging journey, a very serious one. Sometimes I compare it to being a monk at times because it's quite selfless, in many ways. And I think it's got a lot of lessons to teach us. So parenting is sort of a journey in and of itself, just for who we are as individuals and as an adult and as adults. But we're going to talk a little bit about how we have been faring on this parenting journey. I suppose that only time will tell how good we've done, but we're having fun with it. I'll let Richard kick it off. I know he's thought about this a lot, and he's got his own philosophies on this. And he's probably a much better father than I could ever try to be. But I know we try our best. I know we try our best, and our kids love us, and we love our kids. So, Richard?
Yeah, hey guys, welcome again to another conversation. This is a kind of a cool one, right? We all, once we have kids, it's our life mission to raise the best and most successful kids by some definition of what best and successful means. So we're not by any means experts on this on this topic, and it's funny that Kofi said that I'm a much better parent. That's a lie. I always tell him that he's much better than I am, but maybe that's the thing. Like, there's no real objective measurement of who's good and who's not.
Right.
But one of the things I wanted to start out with, I mean, this is sort of been the beginning of my parent journey. Well, I read The Prophet by Khalil Gibran, which is sort of my favorite book of all time. It's little snippets. It's not a lot of information. You can read one verse. It's sort of like, a collection of poems. But I'm gonna read this one on children because I think it's sort of a good starting point, just to kick off the discussion. Your children are not your children. They're the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but not from you. And though they are with you, they belong not to you. You may give them your love, but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. You may house their bodies, but not their souls, for their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. You may strive to be like them, but seek not to make them be like you. For life goes not backward, nor tarries with yesterday. You are the bows from which your children as living arrows are set forth. The archer sees the mark upon the path of the infinite, and he bends you with his might, that his arrows may go swift and far. Let your bending in the archer's hands be for happiness. For even as he loves the arrow that flies, he loves the bow that is stable. And so I read that, like I said, before I became a parent. And, your first thought when you were a kid, right? Because that's your first example as a parent. Like, what was it like when you were kids? And I always felt like my parents didn't understand me, right? And maybe I think in our model, a lot of times we tend not to listen to the voices of our kids. Or at least I know when I was young, a lot of times I remember hearing, well, y'all born yesterday, we all know. But on the flip side, my dad would always tell me what's hidden from the old is revealed to the young, which was two sides of the story. But I think, that's sort of been how I viewed parenting or try to at least, right? Because you know, there's a certain level of excitement you get when you think about being a parent, right? And the first thought, at least for me when I was younger, was like, I wanted to be a great parent, right? I wanted to sort of create the environment that I didn't have, but also recognize that there were a lot of cool things as a kid that I did have. And so, you know, I went I went forward with that idea and you know, kind of think back about throughout that process, the back and forth of thinking back what it was like as a kid, the relationship with my parents, what did I want to create. And so that's sort of been my starting point. You know, like you said, I have two kids, 5 and 9, and I'll tell you, they're they're both different. But I think what I've recognized that's probably the most important thing for me to do as a parent is just listen to them, right? And not so much try to direct their path, because of the fact that they start at a different starting point than we did, right? They see the world differently than we did, and for us to think that we've got the formula for their success, right, when they're going to live into a time that we've never existed, is sort of like, you know, feeling a little too good about our abilities,
Right.
right? And so that's how I've sort of viewed it. I mean, I don't know what your approach has been
Yeah.
as you try to raise your kids. I know they all have their own personality, and that's certainly something that I've recognized, that no one model suits all of it. So, you know, we
Yeah.
all have our own individual experiences.
I think before I had children, I had a lot of preconceived notions about what parenting would be. Of course, I didn't know what to expect. I think the process of becoming a parent was sort of important. You know, watching you know, your wife pregnant, and then actually being there. I was actually there when, you know, this child was born, and then going to the sort of the doctor visits, and then hearing, you know, the doctors talk a little bit about the child developing, and sort of ascribing this personality, you know, to this developing child in the womb. Like, oh, this one seems like they're shy, he's moving, he's hiding, he's responding to things, right? And so you start to get this sense of like a developing personality in the womb. And I think those little bit of just experiences with the unborn child in that sense really started to shape my thinking that, "Hey, this child is very separate and independent, you know, even at this stage." And then I remember when they were both born and sort of coming out, right? I could almost see their personality from day one. And I think that is one of the things that sort of informed my philosophy on parenting, was that in large measure, the kids did not appear to be as blank as some may have assumed, that they were coming into the world completely blank. They didn't have any personality. They knew nothing. You know, they experienced nothing. But the fact is, they seem to have come into the world with little habits already, things they like, didn't like, fears, no fears, you know, and different things like that. And so for me, I started to realize that my role was really a guidance role, and that it was really important for me to sort of guide this new human being, this new individual, in terms, like you said, to live a life that I'm not going to, but what are those fundamental principles that they need to understand and know? And so we started working on, I started thinking about, all right, I'm going to try to help these children understand what their strengths are, because you can leverage your strength, right, regardless of the time that you're in. But more important, but just as important, to help them understand what their weaknesses might be. You know, they have issues of self-discipline, right? They can't discipline themselves, or they've got things where they give up, right? My philosophy became, how am I going to teach them to overcome, you know, those weaknesses in time, and just provide the guidance and tools and sort of tips on how to deal with those things, you know, as they go through life. but to stay away from forcing them into becoming anything that I've done. And I don't want my kids to become like me, right? I want them to be better. I'm not forcing them to go down any particular path, right? The whole process is guiding them along the way to think about what they think is important for their lives, what makes them happy in particular, and help them go down that path, and sort of, helping guide them in their decision making process overall. I think I told you the story. I always remember when I met my father-in-law for the first time, and he's a very principled man, and he talked a lot about how he raised his children, and what sort of deal he made, sort of between him and God and these children. And I looked at it and said, that's a great example. I don't know if I can live up to something, like that, because I had no idea, at this
Yeah.
what being a father was going to be. But I think the great thing about it is parenting has been not only a process in terms of raising children, but a process for me, right? It's been a life-changing process on my side when you're talking about learning to be patient, learning to listen, some of the things that we talked about in terms of conversation, and learning to be selfless, right? Learning to be completely selfless, and just to sit down and try to figure out, because when a kid is 5 years old or 4 years old and they're talking to you, you have no idea what they're talking about. You have to really sit and listen and ask questions and try to figure it out. Because if you don't do that, you're going to get some screaming and some shouting. And so you're like, look, I want to understand what you're saying. I'm going to sit down. I'm going to listen. And I feel like that teaches you other skills in life as well. So parenting is a journey not only for the children, but it's really a journey for the parent as well. And I mean, you raised some great points about not being so possessive of your children, right? To the point where you feel like you have to pour into them everything that you are. I think, yes, there's room for that in terms of pouring in the good things, but really allowing them to, like a plant, right? Helping them to grow and cultivating, so that they could take off in life and really become productive and successful citizens in the world.
Yeah. It's interesting that you talk about, sort of listening and the role that kids play in our personal growth. I completely agree. I mean, I think when you have kids, it's like they're going to grow. They're going to be themselves, right? They're going to be this person. They're going to probably grow up to, be much better than we are, contribute more to a greater society than we have. But it's really sort of a learning experience, and a growth opportunity for us, right? Because you talk about those things like listening, right? And helping to build conversation with them. And one of the things that we've started done in our house for a long time is we have grown-up conversations with our kids. And I know some people don't agree with that. But what it does, in a sense, when I say grown-up conversation, I mean like we'll talk about anything, right? And be willing to sort of listen to their thoughts, right? Because and I remember this is an example that that Zane, I think I don't know, maybe he was 7. And we went to a camp, right? And he was arguing with another little boy, like, yes, a guy can marry a guy if he wants to. And I was like, whoa, where did that come from, right? But I think, like, for me, it's just always an observation to listen to them and hear sort of like that's sort of a reflection of their thought patterns, right? And they're not sort of, I don't want to say scarred, but they don't have sort of that heavy influence of the societal norms at that stage of their life. And so their thoughts are very much like, it's worth listening to them because they have a message, right? They don't see the world in the same tainted way that we've probably seen the world, or growing up with all the dogmas that we've been taught. And so they see it very differently, right? And I think like it really is worth listening to them because they're and even observing their interaction, right? I mean, like one of the things that kids do, which is like adults have to now go back and learn to do, is like be in the moment. Like, you know, your kids will be playing and you'll be like, yo, it's time to go to bed. And be like, no, you don't understand. I'm trying to finish this thing, right? And they're in the moment. And do we rob them of that? Or do we just say like, hey, you know, like, I get that you're driven to do that, like do it, right? Because I think a lot of times we all kind of grew up with some kind of a passion. A lot of us don't know what our passion is because a lot of times, I think I remember hearing somewhere where the amount of times that a kid hears no versus yes by the age of 5 is so vastly different, right? And so I think my view is like, how do I encourage my kids to just fuel their passion, right? And they've got to find it for sure. But I think if I shut them down and everything that they do, I don't know that that helps, right? And I think it's sort of like, it really is listening and recognizing it's an opportunity to grow, right? Because if I, like, you know, that's one of my things. I want to learn how to listen better, and what
Right.
better way than to just listen and just observe, right? The way they sort of conduct themselves, and they've got their own personality that I think we stand to gain more as parents than we can probably give them as adults, you know?
Yeah. One of the things I appreciate is the fact that, as you said, they are individuals, and their personalities are different, right? And this is speaking from the experience of having 2 children. You know, Jaden, my boy, who's 12 years old, is more relaxed and chill, right, and easygoing, right.
Yeah.
And you know, that's just the kind of person he is. He's super smart. And one of the things I've always said to him is, guard your heart, guard your head, and guard your groins. Right. And I've been saying that to him since he's 4 years old. Right. And I always think, and until today, you ask him, what are the 3 things your father always says to you? He said, first, you gotta guard your head, you gotta guard your mind. You gotta think for yourself. You can't let people take control of your thought process. You can't let people take control of your mind. Your mind is yours, and you've got to guard and protect it, protect your ideas, protect who you are. You've got to guard your heart, because he's a loving, caring person, right? This is the kind of kid, if we're driving down the road, you know, and he sees people in a tough situation, he always concerns dad, how are they going to make it and things like that. And I said, hey, never give that up. That is something I didn't necessarily teach you. You seem to have been born that way. It just seems to be a part of just who you are, your concern for other people. So I always tell them, above all things, guard your heart. Be careful who you fall in love with. You know, be careful who you give your heart to. And so guard your heart above all things. How you make friends and so forth, relationships, right? Really, really important. And of course, I tell him to guard his groins, man. You know, I mean, every father's got to tell his son that, right? Right.
No, I haven't told mine that as yet. So
And then, you know, one of the great things I love about my daughter, right? She's got this. I mean, she was born with this self-determined attitude. I remember when she came out of the womb, she used to suck her finger when she was in there. When she came out, she didn't know where it was because she had no control over it, of course, right? And she would scream and bawl. And so I would say, why is she screaming? So I'd take her hand or someone, and then I'd put it in her mouth, and then she would stop. And then it would just come out. And then she'd start screaming again until she was able to manage and get it. And
is that something you did when you were young, Kofi?
Yeah. The thing is, she has remained the same self-determined person until today. She's the kind of person, and I remember when we were growing up in Guyana, right? One of the things that used to happen quite often is adults used to always say, you know your place, right? If you spoke, they'll tell you, shut up. That's one of the things I avoid with my children, in particular my daughter, right? Because I remember sometimes she's speaking up, and I might say something over her, and she always says to me, she said to me one time, she said, Daddy, don't stop my voice. And then her mom turned around and said, oh, honey, you mean tell your dad don't interrupt you? I said, no, don't stop her, because that statement in and of itself is a powerful statement.
Yes.
Do not stop my voice. And so I've actually encouraged her to continue to use that statement, right? And she's talking to people, or she sees other people trying to make a point and somebody cuts them off. She's like, don't stop their voice, right? Because I think the world in which we live in, it's really important, not only just for boys, but particularly for young girls, to feel like they can speak up and people are listening to them. And so she's the one who's teaching me this, right? And so I'm
Yes.
going along learning, right? From my
Yeah.
from my 4 year old, she was 3 years old, and I think she did this 4 years, 5 years old. And even now, if we're having a conversation, I may have instinctively, or somebody may have instinctively, spoken over her. Maybe you thought she had stopped talking, and she comes here and she goes, "That wasn't nice. She stopped my voice." And that continues to ring true. And this is one of the things I think we're trying to do with her in particular, is to hone these skills, right, into some leadership skills, right? You look at your child and you think they're bossy and they're boss around the house. And I'm thinking, look, I only have to put up with it for a couple of years. Right? The rest of the world has to deal with it, with this leader and this person who's decisive. Because how many times did we wish that we were decisive, whether we were on a job or we were out talking to people, we kind of hit our feelings and so forth. She is someone who speaks her mind. She speaks how she feels. She speaks up. And I think that's a good thing, and I'm cultivating that. I'm like, look, this is who you are. You're clearly happy when you're this way. Let's just learn some respect for other people. Let's teach you how to respect other people the way you want to be respected. But it's important for you to cultivate, these habits and these attitudes going on. But two completely different children, and you almost have to apply. I know you almost have to apply a different way in terms of how you reason and deal with them. And it's nothing to do with favoritism. It's just that people are different, they learn differently, and sometimes you have to find a different way to communicate and deal with that.
Definitely. If that's one of the things I think that sort of hit us smack in the face about how different our kids could be, right? Because we had Zane, and he was 4 years old, and he's this great kid, right? He's quiet. You take him out to restaurants, he could eat, and you just chill, he's just like the coolest dude ever. And we're like, yeah, we got this. Like, we'll make another one.
That was me
And then
too.
the second one came, and it was like this completely different personality. And like, they certainly have their own sort of way that they do things. I think one of the things that we caution ourselves constantly is don't try to compare them to each other, right? Like Zario was running and moving and jumping, and Zane's just this chill dude. He's just okay, just sitting and relaxing. And as a result, they grow differently, right? One will have better motor skills at an early age, and the other, while the other one might be maybe a little bit more sort of intellectually developed at an earlier age. And I think trying to compare them is something that a lot of times I think as parents we tend to do, like, oh well, this one was maybe got potty trained at 2 or however old. This one should probably do it at the same time or less time, right? And we're always trying to hurry it along, or trying to do a comparison. And I think that's not always healthy, because even as I think about like the second child comes in, right, and they're the smallest person in the room, right, and they're observing, and everybody has dominion over them, right? They're big, and it's like they almost come into a world very different from the one that the first kid came into, right? They've got to fight different battles, right? Their whole journey from the beginning is different, right? And so I think we have to sort of observe them and watch them grow and understand their challenges are different, right? They see the world differently, and as you said, they have thoughts of their own, right? Don't let us try to too much impregnate their mind with our ideals of the world and our thoughts of the world. I think we can certainly set examples if we like, but I think to say that they must become X or Y is sort of like maybe robbing them a little bit of that sort of self-discovery journey. And even and you and I talk a lot about this, Kofi, we're sort of at a stage in our life where I think in some ways we're trying to fuel that passion, right, a little bit more, and you just think about like what you could achieve in a year of doing that on a consistent basis. Can you imagine if you could help your kids do that, from the time they're born, right? And the things that they do, like I look at, like both Zane and Zari are very different. Like, one of them will probably want to be in the kitchen a little bit more and help me cook. So my 5-year-old is helping me, with a knife, and I've got to be like, gotta be cautious. But when you see sort of the development as they're encouraged to just do the things that they enjoy, and they're actually pretty good, right? They grow up, right? And so I think the idea is not just shutting them down and telling them they can or they can't do stuff, and maybe just accepting sometimes that they're gonna do it a little messy. That's okay, right? But we know as adults that every time we do it and we do it a little bit more, we keep growing, right? And so I think there's so much opportunity for us to sort of present them with an environment that encourages their growth, and not just says, well, no, you can't do that yet. Wait until you're older. Some things you gotta wait until you do. I think it's more of let's see how we can sort of monitor the environments that they're in, but also encourage them to do the things that they love, right? Because one might enjoy doing the dishes while one may not. And one may enjoy cooking while one may not, or and a lot of times they might not enjoy any of that. But I think it's really just sort of helping them to find what they're passionate about and what things that they do, and just watch them grow as they do it more and more.
For me, it's always been like the little things with these kids as I watch them. There are two things I'd say, right? The first is it's amazing how much they learn from experience, because a lot of kids just learn from doing things. And I think sometimes we grew up, where, sometimes your parents didn't want you to touch, certain plates or play on a chair or do certain things, right? And I know when I, try to reconsider and think about some of those things, and I come from great parents, by the way. This is not, I hate parents. I love my parents. I think they've done a great job. Let me say that. I used to get my ass whooped, but I probably, like I said,
you probably deserve some of that.
Oh, some of it. I wasn't the best of kids. But the point here I was going to make is it's amazing how it's the little things, like you said, right? Sometimes kids, let's say they're playing with a glass and they're filling it even with just water, and it's a simple thing, and we're so concerned about, they might break it or something might go bad, and then you think that's a $10 glass, right? $5 something, but you price it so much, and you get into this habit of denying them. And then I usually, my wife and I would usually say, it's fine. What if they mess up the table? We'll just clean it up, and even if the table gets scratched, what's wrong with that, right? It's got some history, it's got some story on there. So we don't always try to keep everything totally pristine. And what's been amazing from that kind of experience is, even as you have these conversations with the children, I always remember that Jaden blows my mind with a lot of things, just with the way he thinks. I remember us driving one time, and we were just having conversations about driving and going over things. And one day, I told him, that's it's called, when you go over a bump on the road. He said people put that there because it's a speed bump. So he said to me, why do you call that a speed bump when it's actually slowing down? Right? And I never thought about that, right?
Yeah.
Slow bump, right? Even though I say, well, it's the impede speed, but he says it's still it is a slow bump. And then one day we're in the kitchen and we're about to cook, and he says, what did you just do? I'm like, I'm preheating the oven. He's like, you can't preheat something. I mean, once you turn it off, it's heated. You turn it on, it's heating. Right? It's just these little things. And then I remember reading Goldilocks to Gianna. And, Goldilocks was always like, a favorite story. And here's this little girl in the bear's house. And the first thing my daughter said, why would you go in someone's house and just eat their food? I mean, that's just terrible. It's just terrible to do that. And so how, when they start asking these questions, right, and they start reinterpreting these things, you start to realize, you start to ask yourself, you said, these kids are a lot smarter than we are. I don't remember ever asking why Goldilocks was going into people's house and eating their food, or Jack and the Beanstalk. And she and I were talking with Jack and the Beanstalk, he's like, this Jack guy, he stole stuff from the giant. I mean, this is terrible. Right? Jack was always the hero of the story and things like that, But just the way that, they perceive things and the things that they're learning. I mean, they're teaching, as I said, they're teaching me a lot, because there've been those moments where you go, I think you kind of have a point there, you know.
Yeah.
Kind of have a point there, right? And so it's really interesting to see how they think differently, you know, about these things and sort of express that. There's just so much to learn, you know, from these children, man. So much to learn.
Yeah. So maybe we can start winding it down,
Yeah, yeah,
because
definitely.
I know we've talked a lot about sort of all the cool things that we learn from our kids, and a lot of people are probably thinking, well, okay, so tell me, what am I supposed to do as
Yeah,
a parent, right? Or at least share what you do as a parent. One of a couple of things I think about off the top is sort of, for me, and I'll let you share your sort of maybe things that you do. I think for me, it's sort of creating an environment for them to sort of, as I said earlier, like encourage, fueling their passion, right? Um, Sort of, I think you touched a little bit on that, sort of
yeah,
encouraging that independent thinking, right? Like, think for yourself, don't necessarily let somebody else think. And it's interesting because, like when we were younger, people would tell us stuff and we didn't have access to information instantaneously.
yeah,
um, I'm sure all of our kids know to ask Google or ask Siri or somebody, right? So we can't BS them anymore, right? But I think that's when it's so important to think independently, right? Because a lot of times, sometimes I'll have conversations with the kids and they'll say something to me. I'm like, where did you hear that? And they're like, oh, well, I saw it on YouTube. And I was like, did you fact check that? And then they'll go fact check it. And then they'll be like, oh, okay, maybe this wasn't right. But I think that's sort of like, encouraging them to think independently. One of the things that I think is also key is sort of encouraging that's the sense of personal responsibility, right? Like you've got to take responsibility for your own life, right?
exactly.
Don't necessarily. And I mean, like, I'm talking to a 5-year-old and a 9-year-old already, so there's a certain amount of responsibility. I think even in that context, right? Like I tell my son sometimes, if there are things, what's your priority list, right? What do you wake up with? What are the things you need to get done? I'm like, buddy, like if you get all these things done by 10 o'clock, the whole day is yours. But you got to take responsibility for it, right? And I think to me, I think that's helpful, understanding that the life that I have is something that I have to own for myself.
Right.
And like I said, there's only so much owning you can do at that stage. But those are sort of like some big things that
Yeah.
I
And I
aim to provide so that they can grow into being, their best selves.
Yeah, and I would say that you know, shout out to my parents. I think this is something that they taught us early, about taking responsibility for our lives, about making decisions. You know, my mom was always against idleness, right? Yeah, he didn't like idleness. And one of the things I particularly liked about the way my parents raised me is and I guess it was part of the duty when you grew up in a certain kind of lifestyle in Guyana, right? You had to do the dishes, you had to clean your room, you had to wipe the step, you had to clean the yard, right? You had to clean the bathroom. You know, all you had to help garden. You had to help garden. You had to, you know, we used to farm in the yard. You know, yeah, we had chickens and all these things, right? Excuse me. And so we had to do all these things. And so they were teaching us a sort of responsibility as children. And so it's sort of the same things that I think I've grown up and tried to do with my children. You know, like I have my son now, even though we have a dishwasher, I said, hey, you know, you got to learn to do the dishes. And it's not because you need to learn to do the dishes for the sake of doing the dishes, is that you have to learn responsibility and you have to take responsibility for yourself. There are certain skills, of course, that you need as an individual, you know, when you're growing as an adult, but you have to learn responsibility. And the only way to learn responsibility is to start practicing certain actions, cleaning your room. You know, he takes responsibility now to take the garbage out, right? Clean the kitchen, you know, do the dishes and these sorts of things. And then the same thing with my 5-year-old daughter, right? Is to pick up all her toys and put them away, clean up her own bedroom, you know, pick up after her. I help her clean up, right? But to start teaching, as you said early, this sense of self-responsibility, right? So that they can understand how important, you know, those things are. teaching them, I think giving them an opportunity just to have fun. I think the most important thing here is kids need to have fun. Like when I was growing up, I know a lot of kids used to be in lessons all the time. And I'm not saying don't send kids to lessons and don't get them educated. People have to work hard, and that's really important. But you can't forget to let your kids just be kids, man. Run around and
Yeah.
have as much fun with as many friends as possible. And one of the things that we're trying to do is to push our kids back to spend time with family, their cousins, and even making friends, but getting to know their grandparents and all these different people. Because I think that experience with different people is really going to help them, help shape their future, help shape their lives, and so forth, right? And just having that wide cross section of experience, reading, watching shows, doing different things, talking to different people is all important in how I think they grow up. So I think it's really about creating an environment where they can flourish, an open, wide environment where they can have experiences that they're going to remember as they grow up, to be responsible, responsible adults. I think that's one of the most important things you can do for them. It's just give them the freedom to be kids. Let them have fun. Let them grow up and just be who they are.
Yeah. One of the things that I'll probably end with is I remember a long time ago I read this, right, about like the way we remember time as human beings, right? And I think the general thought is that we remember times by the memorable experiences we
Exactly.
create, right? And so if we think back about our time with our parents, which I think is sort of, at some point, we'll want our kids to think back about their time with us. They'll remember the memorable experiences, and you talk about having fun there. And our kids are sometimes, so in the moment that, like sometimes you don't want them to be, but they are. But I think a lot of times there is the opportunity for even us as adults to really seize those moments when they want to have fun and say yes a little bit more often, and
Yeah.
just create a memorable experience with them, because they'll remember that time when maybe you were busy but you took 5 minutes out and you said, hey, let's go paint the picture, let's go play,
Yeah.
let's go play with the water guns outside, or just run around or go for a ride or something. I mean, those little moments present themselves, and I think it's key for us as parents to sort of seize those moments and really have the ability to leave a lasting impression on our kids.
All right, man. Well, guys, we hope your parenting journey is as interesting as ours. And comment, like below, and share your experiences. Expand the conversation.
Expand the conversation.